The distinguished senator from Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I remember when you were all the way down here with me. I don't know what happened.
Things happen.
Okay, thank you all for being here. I'm going to try to get through a lot as efficiently as possible. I want to begin, Mr. Scharf, by talking about housing supply and affordable housing. I recently wrote to you and several other mortgage lenders about accessory dwelling units, so basement or backyard apartments, in-law suites. There's some regulatory changes at the FHFA-related agencies that may allow more lending to capitalize the construction of accessory dwelling units. Just like your commitment that you're going to respond to my letter thoughtfully and consider how you can capitalize more of that construction to bring more housing supply online and help more families afford housing.
Absolutely, Senator, we will.
Thank you, Mr. Scharf. Ms. Fraser, I'd like to ask you about language access to banking services for prospective homeowners, for entrepreneurs, accessing credit, accessing depository services in languages other than English is important for many of my constituents. I noted that Citigroup now offers the Citi mobile app entirely in Spanish. That's a step that I applaud. Just in brief, can you talk about other opportunities to expand access to banking services for Spanish speakers, Korean speakers, other non-English language speakers?
Well, first of all, I agree with you. The importance of making this very accessible, having it in a language one understands is an important element of providing access to banking services. The other efforts are also on the digital technologies that have evolved, is making sure that those are readily available for those populations that haven't been used to working with the bank and maybe intimidated walking into a bank branch or asking for assistance is also an important step forward. So I think both the app and also working with our different partners in various communities, making sure that we're providing webinars or other areas. So it's a friendliness towards the bank to build trust and understanding and comfort with using the many services we have available.
Thank you, Ms. Fraser. And let's remain in touch about how the industry can better serve linguistically diverse communities. Mr. Moynihan, I'd like to ask you a question about the vulnerability of various communities to fraud. There's been some discussion of Zelle here. I'm particularly worried about scams and fraud that we've seen in Georgia targeting veterans, targeting new mothers. I'd like for you to just commit to following up with my office. Your staff can follow up with my office about the steps that you're taking and that you recommend based upon what you've seen is effective to protect veterans and new mothers and families in Georgia and across the country from fraud. Will you do that, please?
Sure, Senator. I think if you may have missed it earlier, but we had a fairly robust discussion about all the commitments by all my colleagues and ourselves to continue to work on the fraud side of this.
I didn't miss it. I followed it closely, but I'd just like to hear from your team on how we can work together
Sure.
to continue to crack down on fraud. Thank you so much. Mr. Scharf, question for you about rural bank closures. Many rural counties in Georgia, Hancock County, Wheeler County, Dooley County, have lost branches. What steps can banks take, and I've just got a minute and a half left, some more ground to cover, but in a nutshell, to sustain the availability of credit and banking services in rural communities?
Well, first of all, I think banks should be very, very sensitive. I think we are about not leaving a community unbanked. And so if we are looking at closing facilities, we should think twice about it if there's no other banking service there. And that could mean us staying or working with a community bank or selling those deposits and customers to someone else there. That, in addition to some innovative solutions that we're all working through, such as mobile banking, and I mean physical mobile banking, which comes to different communities at different points in the week, is also an interesting solution.
Mr. Scharf, follow-up for you. Obviously, as lenders, you have obligations, fiduciary obligations, shareholder obligations, regulatory obligations to assess the creditworthiness of borrowers, and that's part of your job. How can creditworthiness be accurately assessed without using methodologies with unintended consequences that might, for example, discriminate on race or other lines?
Well, I think one of the things that we talked about earlier is the need to continue to try and refine FICO scores, which I think we're all doing work on. A lot of it's being led by the OCC, but we all have our individual efforts as well to look at things like rent payments, utilities, phone bills and things like that, because those very often are the consistent payments that more diverse people wind up building their credit upon and aren't always reflected in a FICO score.
Thank you. With the chairman's indulgence, one final question.
Sure.
It's a compound question. You'll forgive me, I hope. Mr. Diamond, this is a good one to close on. Dodd-Frank, what's working, what's not, and is financial regulation fragmented across too many agencies with overlapping jurisdiction? Let's see, maybe the chairman may give you a minute to answer that one.
Mr. Diamond, try to answer it in 60 seconds.
What worked is to resolution, recovery, capital, liquidity. That was all good. A lot of things in there had nothing to do with all that. Lehman Brothers simply wouldn't happen today. Too much capital, too much bailable debt, too much liquidity, et cetera. Regulations have to be calibrated. So the things that don't work is, I mentioned yesterday, we're going to have $1 trillion of cash at one point, unable to deploy to help clients because you're going to run into these red lines of various capital things. And my request is people should just thoughtfully look at the effect of these things. And our regulatory system also made it very hard for our regulators. So if we talk about housing here, there are 7 people with independent authority on mortgages. So it's almost impossible to change them in a way that would benefit America. And, I wish one day we would fix that problem. We balkanized the system.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Diamond. Thank you, Senator Ossoff.